Every age requires its own fables, especially those that, as Webster defines it, enforce a useful truth. The Instant Millionaire presents us with a powerful and original fable, one that reveals one of the most useful truths of all, that financial prosperity and a fulfilling life well lived are goals we can all achieve if we understand and practice the principles of success. Perhaps a fable is the finest form in which to present these truths, for in the childlike simplicity of a fable, we can communicate directly with the childlike simplicity of our subconscious minds and create a great many positive changes in our lives. We're very proud to be the publisher of these cassettes. The author is a genuine millionaire, and his little fable is not one to be taken lightly. We recommend listening to these cassettes repeatedly, studying and practicing the material. The Instant Millionaire is a brilliantly conceived book that can make you wealthy in a great many ways, and some are far more satisfying and valuable than material riches. And now, The Instant Millionaire. Chapter 1, in which the young man consults a wealthy relative. There was once a bright young man who wanted to get rich. He had had his fair share of disappointments and setbacks that couldn't be denied, and yet he still believed in his lucky star. While he waited for fortune to smile, he worked as an assistant to an account executive in a small advertising agency. He was inadequately paid and had felt for some time that his job offered him little satisfaction. His heart was simply no longer in it. He dreamed of doing something else, perhaps writing a novel that would make him wealthy and famous and end his financial problems once and for all. But wasn't his ambition a bit unrealistic? Did he really have enough talent and technique to write a bestseller? Or would the pages be filled with the bleak, unfocused ramblings of his inner misery? His job had been a daily nightmare for more than a year. His boss spent most of each morning reading the newspaper and writing memos before disappearing to indulge in a 3-hour lunch. He also changed his mind continually and gave contradictory orders. But it wasn't only his boss. He was surrounded by colleagues who were also fed up with what they were doing. They seemed to have abandoned any sense of vision. They seemed to have given up altogether. He didn't dare tell any of them about his fantasy of dropping everything and becoming a writer. He knew they would treat it as a joke. When he was at work, he often felt cut off from the world, as if he was in a foreign country unable to speak the language. Every Monday morning, he wondered how on earth he was going to survive another week at the office. He felt totally alienated from the files piled high on his desk, from the needs of clients clamoring to sell their cigarettes, their cars, their beer. He had written a letter of resignation 6 months earlier and had walked into his boss's office a dozen times with the letter burning in his pocket, but he had never been quite able to go through with it. It was funny. He would not have hesitated 3 or 4 years ago, but now he seemed unsure of what to do. Something was holding him back, some kind of force, or was it simply cowardice? He seemed to have lost the nerve that had always helped him get what he wanted in the past. He kept waiting till the time was ripe, finding all kinds of excuses for not jumping into action, wondering if he could ever really succeed. Had he turned into a perpetual dreamer? Did his paralysis spring from the fact that he was saddled with debts? Or was it because he had simply started to get old, a process inevitably triggered the minute we give up our visions of the future? One day when he was feeling especially frustrated, he suddenly thought of visiting an uncle of his who had become a millionaire. Perhaps he might be able to give him some advice, or better yet, some money. His uncle was a warm, friendly person who immediately agreed to see him. He refused to lend him any money, however, claiming he wouldn't be doing him a favor. "How old are you?" his uncle asked after listening to his tale of woe. 32, the young man whispered timidly. "Do you know that by the time John Paul Getty was 23, he'd already made his first million? And that when I was your age, I had $500,000? So how in the world is it that you're forced to borrow money at your age?" "Beats me. I work like a dog, sometimes over 50 hours a week. Do you really believe that hard work is what makes people rich?" "I guess so. Anyway, that's what I've always been led to believe." "How much do you make a year? $25,000? "Yeah, about that much," replied the young man. "Do you think that someone who earns $250,000 works 10 times as many hours a week as you do?" "Obviously not. So if this person earns 10 times more than you do without working any more than you do, then he must be doing something quite different from you. He must have a secret you are totally unaware of. That must be true. You're lucky you understand that at least. Most people don't even get that far. They're far too busy trying to earn a living to stop and think about how they could get rid of their money problems. Most people don't even spend an hour of their time trying to figure out how they could get rich and why they've never managed to do so. The young man had to admit that despite his burning ambition and his dream of making a fortune, he had never taken the time to really think his situation through. Everything seemed to distract him and prevent him from facing up to a task that was obviously of fundamental importance. The young man's uncle was silent for a while, then smiled. "I've decided to help you out. I'm going to send you to the man who helped me get rich. He's called the Instant Millionaire. Have you heard of him?" "No, never," the young man said. "He chose that name because he claims he became a millionaire overnight after discovering the true secret of making a fortune. He claims he can help anyone become a millionaire overnight, or at least acquire the mentality of a millionaire." His uncle turned to a large map on the wall and pointed to a small, somewhat isolated town. "Have you ever been there?" "No." "Why not give it a try? Go and find him. He just might reveal his secret to you. He lives in a fantastic house, the most beautiful one in the whole town. You shouldn't have any problem finding it." "Why don't you just tell me the secret? Then I won't have to take the trouble of going there." "Simply because I don't have a right to. When the Instant Millionaire confided it to me, the first thing he did was make me swear never to tell it to anybody. However, he did say I could refer people to him." All of this seemed both surprising and involved to the young man. It certainly aroused his curiosity. "Are you sure you can't tell me anything? Anything at all?" "Absolutely positive. What I can do is recommend you highly to the Instant Millionaire." The young man's uncle pulled out a sheet of elegant writing paper from a drawer in his massive oak desk, took his pen, and hastily scribbled a few lines. He then folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and handed it to his nephew. "Here's your introduction," he said, "and here's the millionaire's address. One last thing. You must promise not to read this letter. If you ever do open it, despite my warning, and you still want it to work for you, you'll have to pretend that you haven't opened it. But how can you undo what's already been done?" The young man didn't have the vaguest idea what his uncle was talking about, but he agreed. His uncle had always been a bit eccentric, and he was doing him a favor after all, so he decided not to press the point. He thanked him warmly and left. Chapter 2, in which the young man meets an elderly gardener. The young man sped off toward the Instant Millionaire's town, his mind racing faster than his automobile. How hard was it going to be to meet this man? Would he welcome an unannounced visitor? Would he reveal his secret method of getting rich? Just as he approached the millionaire's house, he was overcome by curiosity, and despite his uncle's words of warning, opened the letter of introduction. He was shocked. His heart rate climbed and he broke into a sweat. He wondered whether his uncle had made a mistake or was playing a joke on him because the letter was only a blank sheet of paper. He was now at the gate of the millionaire's house and noticed a security guard. The guard had a stony expression. He looked as impenetrable as the enclosed fortress he was protecting. "What can I do for you?" the guard asked dryly. "I'd like to meet the Instant Millionaire." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but..." "Well then, do you have a letter of introduction?" The young man pulled the letter halfway out of his pocket and quickly stuffed it back again. "May I see your letter?" the guard pressed. The young man remembered his uncle's words. "If you open the letter, you must pretend that you haven't." He handed the letter to the guard, who glanced at it. His face remained totally expressionless. "Fine," he said as he gave the letter back to the young man. "You may come in." The guard showed him where to park and led him to the front door of the millionaire's luxurious Tudor-style home. An impeccably dressed butler opened the door. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I want to meet the Instant Millionaire." "He's unable to see you at the moment. Please wait for him in the garden." The butler accompanied the young man to the entrance of a garden with a glistening pond in the middle of it. He wandered in, admiring the beautiful flowers, bushes, and trees, and then he caught sight of a gardener who was bent over a rose bush. He must have been well into his 70s or 80s. and he wore a wide-brimmed straw hat that concealed his eyes. When the young man approached him, the gardener broke off his work and welcomed him with a smile. He had bright, cheerful blue eyes. "What have you come here for?" he asked in a warm and friendly voice. "I've come to meet the instant millionaire." "Oh, I see. And for what reason, if you don't mind my asking?" "Well, I'd simply like to ask him for advice." The gardener started to go back to his roses, then he stopped and turned and said, "Oh, by the way, you wouldn't have $10 on you, would you?" $10, said the young man, blushing. "It's just that's all I've got left on me." "Perfect. That's all I need." The gardener looked very dignified. His manner exuded exceptional grace and charm. "I'd really like to give it to you," replied the young man. "But the problem is I wouldn't have any money left to get back home." "Are you planning on going home today?" "No, I've no idea," said the young man, now quite confused. "I don't want to leave until I've seen the instant millionaire." "But if you don't need the money today, why are you so reluctant to lend it to me? You might not need it tomorrow, who knows? You might be a millionaire." The reasoning didn't sound completely logical to the young man, but he handed him the money. The gardener smiled. Most people are afraid of asking for things, and when they finally do, they don't insist enough. That's a mistake. At that moment, the butler arrived in the garden and spoke to the old man respectfully. "Sir, could you please let me have $10? The cook's leaving today and insists on being paid. I'm just $10 short." The gardener stuck his hand into his baggy pocket and pulled out a huge roll of bills. He must have had thousands of dollars in cash on him, because the young man caught sight of nothing but $100 bills, except for the $10 bill on top. The gardener peeled off the bill he had just borrowed from the young man and handed it to the butler, who thanked him, bowed somewhat obsequiously, and quickly disappeared into the house. The young man was outraged. How did the gardener have the gall to confiscate the last $10 he had in the world when his pockets were stuffed with more cash than he had ever seen? "Why did you ask me for $10? He said, trying as hard as he could to conceal the rage he felt. "You didn't need it." "But of course I did. Look, I don't have any $10 bills, he said, thumbing through the fat roll of cash. "You don't think I was going to give him 100, do you?" "Why on earth do you keep so much money on you?" "It's my pocket money," replied the gardener. "I always keep at least $25,000 on me in case of an emergency." $25,000, sputtered the young man, aghast. Suddenly everything became clear. The ever-polite butler, that incredible amount of pocket money. "You're the instant millionaire, aren't you?" "For the time being," replied the gardener. "I'm glad you've come. But tell me, how is it that you aren't rich yet? Have you ever seriously asked yourself that question?" "Not really." "Well, that's probably the first thing you should do. Think aloud in front of me if you want. I'll try to follow your line of reasoning." The young man made a few feeble attempts and then gave up. "I see," said the millionaire. "You're not used to thinking out loud. Do you know there are lots of young people your age who are already rich? Some are even millionaires. Others are just on the verge of getting their first million. Did you know that when he was 26, Aristotle Onassis already had $500,000 in the bank when he left for England, where he was planning to set up his shipping empire?" "Only 26. "That's right. And when he started out, he had only a few $100s to his name. He didn't have a university degree, and he didn't have any rich uncles. But now it's time for dinner. Would you like to join me?" "Thank you very much. I'd love to." The young man followed the millionaire, who, despite his age, still had a lively bounce in his step. They went into the dining room where the table had already been set for two. "Please sit down." The millionaire pointed to the end of the table, the place usually reserved for the host. He sat to the right of his young guest, directly in front of a beautiful hourglass engraved with the motto, "Time is money." The butler arrived with a bottle of wine and filled their glasses. "Let's drink to your first million," said the millionaire, raising his glass. He took a sip, the only one he had all evening, and ate very modestly, just a few mouthfuls from a delicious salmon steak. "Do you like what you do for a living?" the millionaire asked the young man. "I suppose so. The situation in the office is a bit difficult." "Make sure you're positive about your choice of careers. All the millionaires I've known, and I've met quite a few over the years, loved their occupations. For them, working became almost a leisure activity, as agreeable as a hobby. That's why most rich people rarely take vacations. Why should they deprive themselves of what they enjoy doing so much? And that's why they continue working even after becoming millionaires several times over. But though it's an absolute must to enjoy your work, it's not enough. To get rich, you have to know the secrets of wealth. Tell me, do you really believe these secrets exist? Yes, I do, said the young man. Good. That's the first step. Most people don't believe there are secrets to attaining wealth. They don't even believe they can become rich. And they're right, of course. If you don't think you can become rich, you very rarely do. You have to start by believing that you can and then crave it passionately. Most people aren't ready to accept these secrets, even if they are revealed to them in very simple terms. Their greatest limitation is their own lack of imagination. That's why the true secrets of wealth are the best-kept secrets in the world. It's a little like the purloined letter in Edgar Allan Poe's story, the millionaire went on. Do you remember it? It's the story about a letter the police were searching for and could never find, because instead of being hidden away somewhere, it was lying in the least likely spot, in plain sight. Their lack of imagination and their built-in prejudices prevented the police from finding the letter. They weren't expecting to find it in plain sight, so they never saw it. The young man listened to the millionaire with rapt attention. He was burning to find out what these secrets were. In any case, one thing was sure. Even if the millionaire didn't really have any secrets, he was certainly a master at setting an impressive scene. Chapter 3, in which the young man learns to seize opportunities and take risks. Now, how much money are you willing to pay to get these secrets of wealth? The millionaire's question took the young man by surprise. Even if I was willing to spend money to get it, I haven't got a dime. But if you had money, how much would you be willing to pay? Name a figure, any figure, the first one that comes to mind. The young man couldn't possibly evade the question now. The millionaire was asking for a very specific answer. I don't know, he replied. $100? The millionaire burst out laughing. Only $100? Then you don't really believe these secrets exist, do you? If you did, you'd surely be ready to pay a lot more for them. Come on, I'll give you a second chance. Name another figure. This isn't a game, but a very serious matter. The young man thought it over. I don't mind answering, he said, but remember, I'm flat broke. Don't worry about that. But if I don't have any money, my hands are tied, said the young man, bewildered. Oh my, exclaimed the millionaire. We've got a long way to go. Since time began, the rich have been using other people's money to amass their fortunes. Anyone really serious has never needed money to make money. By that I mean personal cash. Besides, you must have a checkbook on you. The young man wanted to deny it, but he had stuffed his checkbook into his pocket that morning. God knows why. He had exactly $4.28 in his account. He considered lying about it, but the millionaire had such a piercing gaze, he seemed capable of mind reading. The young man heard himself stutter, as if he were confessing a deep, dark secret. Yes, I brought it with me. He pulled his checkbook out as automatically as a robot, even though an urge to rebel momentarily crossed his mind. He felt spellbound by this man, like someone in the hands of a hypnotist. Yet he wasn't afraid of the millionaire, for he radiated goodwill. He even seemed somewhat amused. Fine, replied the millionaire. Now can you see there's no problem? He uncapped an elegant pen and handed it to the young man. Write out a check for the amount you have in mind and sign it. But I don't know how much to write. All right, put down, say, $25,000. The millionaire uttered this figure in a perfectly straightforward way, without a shred of arrogance. What? $25,000? Said the young man. You've got to be joking. Put down $50,000 if you like, replied the millionaire, so calmly that the young man no longer knew whether he spoke seriously or in jest. Even $25,000 seems far too much. Anyway, you couldn't cash the check because it would just bounce. And all I'd get out of it would be an angry bank manager wondering whether I'd gone crazy, and he'd be right. That's exactly how I undertook my biggest deal ever. I signed a check for $250,000 and then had to scramble around to find the money to cover it. But if I hadn't made out that check right then and there, I'd have missed an excellent opportunity. That was one of my first major business lessons, he said. People who waste time waiting for all the perfect conditions to fall into place never get anything done. The ideal time for action is now. Another lesson this little exercise can teach you is this. If you want to succeed in life, you have to make sure you have no choice in the matter. You have to put your back to the wall. People who vacillate and refuse to take risks because they don't have all the elements in hand never get anywhere. The reason is simple. When you cut off all your exits and put your back to the wall, you mobilize all your inner powers. You want something to happen with every fiber of your being. So why hesitate now, young man? Put your back to the wall. Make out that $25,000 check to me. The young man wrote out the check, slowly filling in the numbers, then the words. But when he came to sign it, he simply couldn't do it. I've never written a check as large as this in my life. If you really want to become a millionaire, you'll have to start someday. You'll have to get used to signing checks much larger than this one. This is only the beginning. But the young man still couldn't sign it. Everything was happening so quickly. He was just about to hand over a check for $25,000 to a man he just met and who was promising some pretty dubious secrets in exchange. What's stopping you from signing? Asked the millionaire. Everything's relative under the sun. In no time at all, this amount will appear insignificant to you. It's not the amount, mumbled the young man. Well, what is it then? I know why you can't sign. You don't really believe my secrets will turn you into a millionaire. If you were absolutely convinced, you'd sign in a flash. Tell me, if you were absolutely positive that these secrets would help you earn an additional $100,000 in less than a year, without having to work harder than you do now, even by working less, would you sign that check? Sure I would, he was forced to agree. I'd make a $75,000 profit. So sign it. I guarantee that you'll be able to earn that amount. Would you be willing to put that in writing? The millionaire burst out laughing once again. I like you, young man. You're determined to cover your back. That's often a very prudent thing to do. Even if you're absolutely sure about your resources, it doesn't mean you should trust the first person who comes your way. He left the table, rummaged about in a drawer, and pulled out a ready-made agreement. This didn't sit very well with the young man. Was the millionaire mass-producing his secrets and selling them to every Tom, Dick, and Harry who showed up? The millionaire signed the guarantee and handed it to the young man, who skimmed it over quickly, satisfied with what he'd read. Then the old man suddenly changed his mind. I've got another idea, he said. How about a bet? He took a coin from his pocket and bounced it up and down in the palm of his hand. Let's play heads or tails. If I lose, I'll give you the $25,000 cash I have in my pocket. If I win, you give me the check. In either case, let's forget about the guarantee. The only problem, the young man said, is what I told you. There's almost nothing in my account. Even if I give you this check, you won't be able to cash it. No problem, said the millionaire. I'm in no hurry. Why not post-date it a year from now? The young man hesitated. All right, under those conditions, I accept the bet. He had now calculated that in any event, he had a full year to change banks, close his account, or simply stop the check. He had nothing to lose. And with the millionaire's new offer, he could even earn $25,000 in a few seconds flat, without having to do an ounce of work. A self-satisfied smile flitted across his lips in spite of himself. He hoped the millionaire hadn't noticed it. The millionaire then proposed a minor clarification which immediately confirmed the young man's doubts. There's just one thing. Should you lose the bet, you have to solemnly swear that you'll honor this check. The young man tentatively gave his word, but just as the millionaire was about to toss the coin, he abruptly interrupted him. May I see the coin? The young man asked. The millionaire smiled. No doubt about it, I really like you, young man. You're cautious. That'll help you avoid a lot of mistakes. Just make sure it doesn't cause you to miss out on a lot of good opportunities. The millionaire handed over the coin. As soon as the young man had carefully examined both sides and returned it, the millionaire asked him to call. Tails. The millionaire tossed the coin, and the young man's heart began to beat as wildly as if he were on his first date. This was the first time he'd ever had the chance of winning $25,000. As he watched the coin spinning in the air, his anxiety mounted sharply. It landed on the table. "Heads," said the millionaire gleefully, but then quickly added a sympathetic, "Sorry." It was hard to say whether he was being sincere or merely polite. The young man couldn't help trembling a little as he signed the check. He would probably get used to signing big checks like this one day, but at this point, it made him feel very strange indeed. He gave the check to the millionaire, who examined it briefly, folded it, and put it in his pocket. "Now," said the young man, "can I have the secrets?" "But of course," said the millionaire. "Do you have a piece of paper? I'll write them down for you. That way you won't forget them." The young man had a hard time grasping his words. The millionaire surely couldn't expect a single sheet of paper to hold all the secrets, especially secrets he just bought for $25,000. "Sorry, I don't have any paper on me." "But didn't you have a letter of introduction when you arrived here? The people your uncle has sent me over the years always had a letter." The young man took it out of his pocket. He handed it over, carefully watching the old man's face as he opened it. But the millionaire didn't seem at all surprised to find it was completely blank. He took his pen, leaned over the table, and was about to write something when he raised his head and asked for the young man to fetch the butler. Fetch the butler. Fetch the butler. Fetch the butler. When the young man came back with the butler, the millionaire was sealing the envelope. He seemed pleased with himself. "Our young guest will be spending the night," he said to the butler. "Would you take him to his room, please?" Then he turned to the young man and said, "Here are the secrets." He stood up and handed him the envelope. Then he solemnly shook his hand, as if he had just wrapped up one of the most important deals he had ever made in his life. "The only thing I must ask you to do is to wait until you're alone in your room before opening the envelope and reading the secrets. And oh, there's one more condition. Before you may read what I've written, you must promise to spend part of your life sharing these secrets with those less fortunate than you. If you agree, you'll be the last person to whom I'll ever give these secrets directly. My work here will be over. I'll be ready to take care of roses in a much larger garden. If you don't feel ready to share these secrets," he said, "you still have time to back out. But then, of course, you won't be able to open the envelope. I'll give you back your check, and you'll be free to go home and get on with the same life you've been leading up to now." Now that he finally had his hands on the letter containing the secrets, there was no possibility of backing out. His curiosity had gotten the better of him. "I promise," he replied. Chapter 4, in which the young man finds himself a prisoner. Soon the young man was alone in his room. The room so luxurious he couldn't help examining it. He went up to the only window, which was very high off the ground, and looked out over the park. He could see where he had first spotted the millionaire looking after his roses with such tender, loving care. Night had fallen, and a full moon cast a luminescent glow over everything. He was filled with anticipation. He was finally going to discover the secrets to making a fortune that had eluded him for so many years. He slowly opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. The sheet of paper was again completely blank. He turned it over. There wasn't the tiniest squiggle on either side. He'd been fool enough to let the old man swindle him. He'd handed over a check for a mind-boggling sum in exchange for something that didn't exist. The millionaire had seemed so honest, and even started feeling fond of the old man. The young man realized that he should have been more careful, that perhaps there was some truth after all in the belief that totally honest people never get rich. He was forced to admit that he had no business sense at all, probably the very reason he was still poor, and now even poorer. A feeling of rebellion engulfed him, and he threw the paper across the room. What could he do? He'd let himself be lured into a well-sprung trap. He had only one alternative, to leave as quickly as possible. Who knows, maybe his life was in danger too. He didn't want to spend the night in this place. He decided the best thing to do would be to sneak out as quietly as possible. He tiptoed to the door and slowly turned the handle, but the door was bolted from the outside. The window was the only other exit, and it was about 30 feet above the ground. If he jumped, he'd surely break his neck. The only option was to ring for the butler. He brought the bell and waited. No one came. He rang again. Nothing. Maybe the bell was out of order. The house was totally silent. He was a prisoner. He lay on the bed and the events of the day raced before his eyes. There was little he could do to fight off the feeling of absurdity that was beginning to overwhelm him. The blank sheet of paper he had bought for $25,000 kept drifting before him, as if bent on mocking him. Sleep finally overtook him. He dreamed of a stranger luring him repeatedly to sign a thick document of the utmost importance, as if his life depended on it. He protested vehemently. There must be some mistake. The document is totally blank. Next morning, the young man felt as if he'd been run over by a 3-ton truck. He glanced at himself in the mirror. He had slept in his clothes and looked awful, but it only bolstered his determination. He had one thought in mind: to find the old man, give him back his secret, and get his check back. He ran his fingers through his hair and headed toward the door, recalling it had been locked the night before. It wasn't now. He strode out angrily and headed for the dining room. He found the millionaire sitting calmly at the table, dressed in the same clothes he'd had on the day before, clean but surprisingly threadbare gardener's clothes. His large, pointed, wide-brimmed hat was lying in front of him on the table. The millionaire was flipping a coin in the air and counting it as it landed on the table. 9, he muttered without taking his eyes off the coin. 10. Damn, he lifted his head. I've never been able to go beyond 10, he said. I get what I want 10 times in a row, and then invariably it fails on the 11th throw, even though I toss it exactly the same way each time. The young man realized he had been duped the night before. My father, who was an accomplished magician, would regularly get to 15, said the millionaire. I didn't inherit his talent. The young man asked to see the coin. The millionaire cheerfully gave it to him, and the young man flipped it onto the table. Heads, tails. It obviously wasn't a trick coin unless there was some secret mechanism that escaped his notice. There was nothing dishonest about our bet yesterday, said the millionaire. I simply displayed my skill at handling money. Some people take skillfulness for dishonesty, but they're two very different things. The young man brandished the letter and threw it on the table. You did a fine job of tricking me, sir. You made yourself some easy money there, $25,000 for a blank sheet of paper. It's the secret of wealth, the millionaire said. Well, you're going to have to explain yourself. Do you take me for an idiot? An idiot? Of course not. You're simply lacking in insight. It's quite normal. Your mind is still immature. Maybe it is, but I can certainly recognize a blank piece of paper when I see one. I assure you, you can become very rich indeed with just this blank piece of paper. That's all I needed to become an instant millionaire way that way. But since I must soon go back to tend my beloved roses, I'll help you. Listen carefully, because as soon as you apply this secret successfully, you'll have to share it with others. Once you've freed yourself of the shackles of poverty, you'll have to show the way to those still bound hand and foot. May I ask you to repeat the promise you made yesterday? There was no doubt about it, the millionaire was an extraordinarily persuasive man. Just a few minutes before, the young man had been ready to curse him, and now he was listening attentively. He repeated his promise. I must warn you that becoming a millionaire will probably seem too easy, but don't let simplicity deceive you. Each time you begin to have doubts, remember Mozart. True genius resides in simplicity. You'll tend to have doubts in the beginning. With time, as wealth is magnetically attracted to you in a most unexpected way, you'll begin to understand. That's exactly what I've been hoping for with all my heart, the young man said. To understand. So much the better. Once you've grasped this secret, you'll know why you believe in it. But in the beginning, despite its simplicity, this secret will seem so surprising that you'll be incapable of understanding it, or even believing it for that matter. So I have to ask you to make a small leap of faith. If the secret exists,